meeting, members will join by telephone or other electronic means. This meeting is also being live streamed and recorded. And regrettably, this method of holding a meeting limits our ability to hear public comment from residents. In lieu of public comment, I encourage members of the public to email council members directly. Our email addresses can be found on the council's website under the About Us section. Because we are conducting the meeting electronically, all votes must be taken by roll call. When we do so, Becky will call the roll in alphabetical order. I and other council members and the public who may be monitoring the meeting must be able to hear your voice. When your name is called for each vote, please clearly state yay or nay or abstain so I can determine whether a majority has voted in favor. With that, Becky, can you call the roll to see if we have a quorum?
Atlas Ingebretson.
Here.
Chambliss. Cummings.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Fredson. Gonzalez. Sterner. Zirin.
Here.
Barber.
Here.
The roll has been called.
Thank you. And with that, we do have a quorum. So with that, I will call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for August 10th, 2020. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. We do have one change to the agenda that we will not be having the TAC report tonight. Mr. Finley got delayed somewhere, so he's unable to attend this evening. And then you can see we have a business item that has been struck and will be moved to a future meeting. So with that, could I entertain a motion to approve the amended agenda?
Cummings moves.
Moved by Cummings. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Seconded by Zirin.
And seconded by Zarin. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, could you call the roll, Becky?
Atlas Ingebretson. Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye. Can you guys hear me? Aye.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Chambliss. Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson. Gonzalez. Sterner. Zirin. Barber.
Aye. With that, we have approved the agenda. Next, on to approval of the minutes from the July 27th, 2020 meeting. Did anyone have any changes or additions? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Moved.
Moved by Zarin, I believe. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Seconded by Cummings. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Chambliss. Thanks. Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson. Gonzalez. Sterner. Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. And we have approved the minutes from July 27th. Seeing as we have no TAC report, we'll move on to other reports. We have MTS Director Thompson.
Madam Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Report tonight. Tonight at 5 o'clock, in just a few minutes, we'll be closing public comment on both the draft update to the 2040 Transportation Policy Plan and the draft 2021 through 2024 Transportation Improvement Program. We will be providing this committee comments on, or a report on comments and responses at a future meeting. And we have been receiving several comments in the last few days on those. So we are getting public comments. In terms of our contracted transit operations update, This week, we will mark the completion of transfer of the food delivery service that we started with COVID. That had been originally was just Metro Mobility Service providing that food delivery from food shelves. And as services started to come back in demand for some service on Metro Mobility, we've had to transition that service of food shelf delivery. And so this week it'll all have been moved over to the transit service. So all the food shelves that we were providing, we will continue to provide food delivery. At least probably we think at least through the end of the year, maybe longer. We just are switching the providers, and it seems to be going just fine with that. TransitLink has more capacity at this time than Metro Mobility, and we believe Metro Mobility ridership continue to grow at its slow but steady growth rates. The demand for the food shelf service does remain fairly strong, and so we definitely wanted to continue that service. Last week, we had one contracted transit worker test positive for COVID. And to date, there have been 43 positive tests among the workforce that works for our contractors. That includes drivers, mechanics, dispatchers, and back office staff. 34 of the 43 positive tests have been cleared and returned to work, and 9 remain out due to a more recent COVID test. Contractors are reporting no issues with staffing levels and are able to meet all the service demands, and they continue to hand out masks to customers. So we are getting very strong compliance from our customers in using their own masks. And we do have a good supply of masks for drivers to hand out if needed. And with that, Madam Chair, that concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Director Thompson? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to report from General Manager Koistra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start with something you're all aware of by now, and that is that the FTA announced that the Southwest LRT FFGA advanced to the 30-day congressional review. While we're not taking for granted the need to successfully complete this step of the process, it's really appropriate to recognize that this is a result of years of tremendous staff work and perseverance, as well as years of leadership and work of council and Hennepin County policymakers. So it's worth acknowledging that. So I want to just congratulate the project office and all the policymakers who have made this happen to reach this important milestone. And so we'll cross our fingers for the next 30 days as we go forward. Also, as a COVID response update, on August 1, we returned to front door boarding on the non-BRT buses. So far, operations reports that this is going well. Additionally, we continue to distribute masks. We've distributed 50,000 masks so far, and I just heard today that we had another shipment of masks come in from, I believe, the FDA. We'll be distributing 30,000 more in the coming couple of weeks. So that'll be 80,000 masks total. As far as COVID cases, we've had a total of 61 cases now at Metro Transit. With respect to a monthly breakdown, in April we had 6, in May we had 27, in June we've had 11, in July we had 11, and in August so far we've had 6. Also, I wanted to mention the listening and learning through crisis effort that's going on, as noted in the Chair Daily Report. And in the August edition of Connect, our staff are connecting with riders during the month of August to understand how this year's crises are affecting them. The pandemic, the police killing of George Floyd, and the destruction of community resources due to civil unrest, we know have had a significant impact on the communities that we serve. So we think it's important that we connect to our customers to both demonstrate our interest in providing better services to them during this time and to better understand the changes in their perspectives. In doing this, we're focusing on the busiest routes and boarding areas, and then we also have a survey available online through August 27th. This is just really trying to get connected with customers who have gone through a lot during the last 4 months. And then just a brief mention on the budget presentation coming up again that because our budget presentation had to be rescheduled for today, I wanted just to quickly remind you that this is a preliminary budget, and this year more than ever, we'll expect significant changes to the budget before it's finally adopted. I'm not going to go into the details of that as I did last week, but we're looking at, we're watching fare and MVES revenue performance month by month. We continue to evaluate appropriate service levels in consideration of demand and social distancing standards. And above all, we're hopeful there'll be reasons for the impact of the pandemic on ridership services to soften sometime in 2021. We don't know that yet, but that's what we're hoping for. But at any rate, this is a preliminary, truly a preliminary budget. It's just a starting point, and we hope to have a better product, a closer product by the time we get to the October release of the public hearing budget. And then, of course, it'll probably change again a little bit before we get to December because we're learning as we go. This is new territory for us. We have a lot of volatile assumptions in this, and that's because it's new territory for everyone. So appreciate your patience as this budget process develops. That's all I have. If there are any questions, I'll take them now, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions for General Manager? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's really a comment. I've had a number of phone calls about the changing policies with Metro Transit, especially around the area of masks. And I just would like to let you know that the comments made when I say that 50,000 masks have been distributed and kind of give a rundown of where they're distributed. People who've had concerns are just overwhelmed with appreciation at the magnitude and the effort that's been given by staff to get those masks out and in use. So kudos to staff for doing that. It is appreciated and noted and commented on. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Cummings. I've had a lot of the same feedback, so it's nice to hear. Any additional questions or comments from council members? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to our first business item for the night. It is business item number 2020-201, Onboard Technology Contract Award, and we have Jess English here today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Good afternoon. As you mentioned, my name is Jess English. I'm the Onboard Technology Manager for Metro Transit Services. And this is business item 2020-201 for MTS Contracted Services. This item is for onboard technology contracted maintenance and for our buses, and it's for a term of more than 5 years, not to exceed the amount of $6,044,000. We went into a competitive process and selected, my team and I selected unanimously Procellus as the contract most knowledgeable, professional, and their ability to answer all of our questions. They were very good in all of our answers. And Procellus is an MCUB certified business and also a veteran-owned business. And we are here before you asking for authorization to move this item forward to the regional administrator to execute the contract with Procellus.
Good. Thank you, Jess. Are there any questions from council members? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-201.
Cummings moves.
Moved by Cummings.
Second.
Is there second
By Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Thank you very much. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll?
Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
Aye.
Chambliss. Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Sterner. Zirin. Barber.
Aye. With that, the business item passes. Thank you, and we're on to our next business item. which is business item 2020-219. It's Metro D line real estate acquisition and condemnation resolution. And we have Katie Roth and Shaheen Hazrat Jafari. I tried. So.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair Barber and committee members. Katie Roth, Assistant Director of BRT Projects at Metro Transit. Before we get into today's item, I would like to introduce Shaheen Jafari to the committee, as he is new in presenting to this committee today. He joined the BRT team as the project manager for the D-Line in August of last year, and he holds a degree in civil engineering and an MBA from the University of Minnesota, and comes to us from the Army Corps of Engineers with a wealth of project management experience on major infrastructure projects, which in his almost year with Metro Transit has been a really great fit for the D-Line project thus far. So with that, I will hand things off to Shaheen to take us through the business item, and we will both be available for questions.
So welcome to the committee, and we're excited to hear from you. And I will practice your name so I get much better at it.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members, and thank you, Katie, for the introduction. The business item 2020-219 and the associated resolution 2020-9 being requested for council action would authorize the acquisition and potential condemnation of temporary and permanent property interests needed for the construction of the Metro D-Line BRT project and the associated locally requested scope. Provide you with a bit of a brief background on the project. The D-Line BRT project is the region's third arterial BRT project. Similar to the A-Line and the C-Line, with bumped out and raised station platforms, and it will substantially replace the Route 5, which is currently Metro Transit's highest ridership. In addition to the station platforms, we're also partnering with Hennepin County and the cities of Minneapolis and Bloomington as a part of an interagency cooperation to construct locally requested pedestrian and street improvements at several intersections where our BRT stations are located. The proposed council action would allow for the acquisition of approximately 103 temporary and 3 permanent easements, with the temporary easements generally extending 5 to 15 feet into adjacent properties for construction purposes, and the permanent easement being primarily sidewalk and bikeway easements, which would be conveyed to our agency partners. All acquisition and relevant activities are funded with existing and available D-Line funds at this time to ensure that necessary property interest can be secured prior to awarding the D-Line construction contract. Lastly, as indicated in Resolution 2020-9, the project is a valid public project with a valid public purpose consistent with the Minnesota statute requirements. At this point, I would be happy to answer any questions on the business item or the resolution for council action to authorize acquisition and potential condemnation of property for the D-Line BRT construction.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council members? Okay, hearing none, I would entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-219.
So moved. Atlas Ingebretson.
Thank you. Moved by Atlas Ingebretson. Is there a second?
Second. Fredson. Second.
Second by Councilmember Fredson. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll?
Atlas Ingebretson.
Aye.
Chambliss. Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sterner. Zirin.
Aye.
Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you very much. So that is the end of our business items for tonight. I would, unless I hear objection, I would recommend that both of these items move non-consent to the full council.
Madam Chair, this is Wes.
go ahead.
I just wanting clarification, and maybe Katie knows this, of whether it was there was a requirement to officially vote on both the business item and the resolution separately, or whether. And I'm not sure of that answer, but I want to make sure that it's done correctly.
Katie?
Chair Barber and Wes, I am not sure as to whether that is a requirement. I apologize, I don't know the procedural requirement associated with that.
I just reading the business item because it's to pass the resolution authorizing the acquisition. I think we can move it as is to the full council, but because we're going to hear it at the full council, if there's any question, we can clarify it there.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Katie. All right. So then we are on to our information items for the evening. Our first information item is TAP and Access Pass updates. And we have Nick, Andrea, and Nick.
Yeah, good evening, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, great. I'm Nick Ewell. I'm the Senior Manager of Revenue Collections at Metro Transit, and I'm going to be doing the least amount of talking tonight. But I'm excited to be here with two of my team members who will be updating you on two of Metro Transit's fare programs. Andrea Keepy will be providing an update on our Transit Assistance Pass, otherwise known as TAP. It's been a while since Andrea's provided an update on TAP to the Transportation Committee. So I'm excited to have her here again to share some of the exciting things that she's been working on. After Andrea's presentation, Nick Arell will introduce you to our newest fare program. It's called the Access Pass. Nick is a program specialist in the Finance Department in Revenue Operations at Metro Transit. And among his many responsibilities, at least in a normal year, is managing our special event operations for our customers. But he's also instrumental in helping bring some of our new fare programs from kickoff through the pilot test. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Andrea and then Nick after she's done. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. As Nick said, my name is Andrea Keepy. I'm the TAP coordinator and I work in the Revenue Operations Department at Metro Transit. I'll just give you the barest outline of TAP and how it works. TAP is a reduced fare that we provide to people who are have lower incomes in the Twin Cities metro area. Once they're qualified, they can get a go-to card that looks and acts exactly the same as any go-to card, which is our stored value card that any of our riders would use. The only difference is that it charges you $1 instead of the full fare, and that discount lasts for a full year. Next slide, please. When we say lower income, we've defined that based on 185% of the federal poverty limit or 50% of area median income. So this table is really just to give you a sense of what sort of person that is. So that's that can be just the low wage workers, or people who are even making moderate incomes with a relatively high family size. Next slide, please. Of course, like any public servant, we're always looking for ways to improve the program, to make it easier for our customers to use, less complicated, and able to reach more and more people. Especially important pressures are on us now because of the pandemic, both on the lower income people themselves trying to make do with severe economic dislocation, and then of course transit has sustained serious damage to ridership. So we extended our thinking a great deal and decided to propose some expansion to the TAP program. So that would be increasing eligibility for people who are unemployed and for people who are seeking asylum. Usually these people are commonly called refugees. Next slide, please. One of the difficulties that we face for the TAP program is that to prove that people are in our income range, it's a large number of people in the metro area, over 600,000 meet the income criteria. They have to show that they are in that income range, and they do that by presenting a document from one of the social benefits programs like food stamps, aka SNAP or EBT, medical assistance, energy bill assistance as well, where we accept about 20 different documents. But of course, not everyone applies for these programs, some because of the social stigma, some because there are other eligibility barriers. And so any more time we can make it easier to prove eligibility, it's helpful to our program. Next slide, please. So again, we targeted unemployment insurance and the refugee status. In the course of doing that examination, we have a number of other expansion options out there that we're looking at and discussing, but we haven't moved on those yet. Next slide. So this is the big scary chart, and it's one of the main reasons I proposed adding this once the pandemic started. We're expecting the worst economic dislocation since the Great Depression. This chart shows how bad unemployment is in the population compared to the peak employment of that period. And so all those different curves and all those different colors show the various recessions that we've had since we started measuring this in 1947. You can see that that red line is where we are at right now, several times worse than the most recent recession and the worst so at that time in 2007, 2008. So there's a real serious need for social supports for these lower income people. Next slide, please.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I just was wondering if you could state what that slide showed exactly one more time. I think you said it was graphing, sorry, I'm outside, the difference between peak employment and unemployment. Did I hear that right?
Yeah, so if you look on the y-axis there, it's percentage of job losses relative to peak employment month. And so that it's designed to show how bad it gets after an economic dislocation by employment, unemployment, and then how many months or weeks it takes to recover from that dislocation. So you can see for the 2007, for example, it starts off slow, there's a huge dip, and then there's a very slow recovery, and finally taking, it looks like 76 months to fully return to the previous employment levels. Is that answering your question, Councilmember?
Thank you. Yes, it does. Could you also just share the point to which it's measuring? It looks like, if I'm looking at it right, you're at about 3 months from the initial dip, which was 2 months out. So
Correct.
This is a couple months.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is the difficulty when you have such a huge spike like this, is it's hard to read the numbers on the graph. But it looks like that the worst point was about 2 months out into the recession, and now we're starting to see a slight improvement at month 3.
Thank you. Yep.
You're welcome, Councilmember. Next slide, please. Okay, so just to give you, so those figures obviously are national figures. It's not quite as bad in Minnesota, but it is a serious problem for the people that are affected by it. That's over 200,000 people as of May, unemployed in the Twin Cities. It's tripling our previous unemployment rate. The way unemployment benefits work in the state of Minnesota, you get up to 26 weeks of benefits with checks equal to 50% of a normal paycheck. So the maximum any person in the program can receive per week is $740. And the total they could get at maximum would be that $19,000 per year. So that puts virtually everyone squarely into our income range. Even people at the top of the benefits for unemployment, if they have an appropriate family size, are going to be in our range. So assuming we are able to catch a number of unemployed people that's roughly similar to the percentage using transit, that's going to be 18,000 people. That's going to double the size of TAP and substantially help our ridership if they take about 10 rides per month, which we think is a conservative estimate. A side benefit of this is potentially some of these unemployed people have never ridden transit before. It might be a first experience for them, and they might decide after hopefully things recover that they want to stick with it. Next slide, please. Of course, like any economic problem in the United States with our institutional racism, it's going to fall more hard on people of color, especially Black Americans. Here in Minnesota, we are no different. 1 in 2 Black workers has filed for unemployment, where it's 1 in 4 for whites. So everyone is suffering, but unfortunately, people of color are suffering worse. So there are inequity implications here. Next slide. Okay, so the second certification that we're going to add for TAP is people who are seeking asylum. These are people who are fleeing oppression, violence, and other grave difficulties in their home country and asking for asylum in the United States. This has been a very highly variable number based on what's going on in the world, wars, political crackdowns. It's varied between about 600 to a high of 5,000 in that years between 2005 and 2019. Just for some perspective and some context, last year we got about 900 refugees. And these are really scattered across dozens and dozens of countries, 20 here, 50 there. Again, for reference, in 2018, the biggest country of origin for refugees in Minnesota were Burma with 300. Being able to have a discounted fare on transit can really help people establish their lives here in the United States. Often they're leaving their home country with nothing. And so it's really important for them to be able to get around to access services and get started, get a foothold, and eventually get a job. So that hardship concern is really a concern. It's not a huge group of people, but we hope that this could add 500 to 2,000 people to TAP. And for those people, I think it would be a really significant benefit in them. Next slide. I believe we're at the point where it's open to questions. That's all I have.
All right. Any questions for Andrea? I just want to make a quick comment then. I think this is fantastic. I think this is, this was a program that we always wanted to find ways to grow and improve access to. And given just the circumstances around COVID and what's happening right now, I think this was a really, really smart move and a good way to open the program to new people. So thank you for your work.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, council members, for your attention.
Chair, this is Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. I don't have a question, but I want to also share just affirmation for the effort and the presentation and support for this work. I'd also just keep on our radar screen. I know we've seen some things about this in the past, but again, I received a call and an email, 2 different people asking about will the council make concerted efforts around moving to a 0 fare format. And I think we all know that there's reality, but without trying things, reality doesn't change. So I would just encourage us to keep thinking about having a plan ready for the time when the political will of stars align for supporting mass transit and transportation for everybody. And I think this is a good step in that direction, but I think it would also be great if we just kept the data up and kept thinking about what it would take for us to make it even more accessible and remove barriers.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from council members before we move on? All right, we're on to Access Pass. So we have Nick Gorell.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I am Nick Gorell. I'm a program specialist with Metro Transit Revenue Operations, and I'm here today to talk to you about Access Pass. Unlike TAP, that is designed to help low-income individuals ride at a reduced cost, Access Pass enables organizations to efficiently pay for their clients' rides. Next slide. Metro Transit provides over 500 organizations with fares that they then give to their clients for rides. When we converted from magnetic fares to go-to cards, organizations struggled with what type of cards to give to their clients. They didn't know if they should give them stored value or how much stored value, and or if they want to give them a monthly pass and which unlimited ride monthly pass to give them. Access Pass was developed to solve that issue. It's a post-billing solution, kind of like a credit card, where the organization hands out the cards and then we bill them at the end of the month for the rides taken. Next slide. Since there was nothing like this before, we had to develop the program. We worked with IS to make Access Pass work on our whole system. Initially, Access Pass was piloted on fixed route, which is our buses and trains, and then expanded to pilot on dial-a-ride services like Metromobility and TransitLink. Access Pass is not a different fare. It is based on the full adult fare set in place by the council with a maximum charge of the monthly pass price. Dial-a-ride services have no monthly max and are billed on the full cash value. At the end of the month, Metro Transit generates a report based on usage and then generates a bill for the client. And then they in turn pay for those rides. Next slide. The current replacement process relies on Metro Transit to transfer any stored value or remaining monthly pass to a new go-to card when it is lost or stolen and sent out by the organization. With Access Pass, it is a whole lot simpler. Whenever a client calls the organization and tells them that they have a lost or stolen card, they then log on, deactivate said card, and take a card right out of their inventory that's waiting and send it to the client. As soon as the client gets the card, they're able to start riding and don't have to worry about the transfer of funds, making sure it's ready on their card. This saves many hours of administration time for Metro Transit and makes it a much more streamlined process for the end user. Next slide. These are the new cards that marketing came up with for us. It's a standard go-to card, but it looks a little bit different, and it states that it's a product of the organization. The bottom is also sleeves that the card go in. Next slide. Along with the cards and sleeves, a specialized user guide was made up for Access Pass. This is sent out with every single card detailing how to use the card, which is specific to Access Pass. Next slide. We successfully piloted the program with 2 medical assistance providers. These providers are Medicaid insurers and waiver providers for government-ran programs. They must provide transportation to their client when requested to go to appointments. The 2 providers serve about half of the 1.2 million Minnesota residents on medical assistance. We have successfully piloted with 2 county services as well, and we created a portal for the clients to manage the program. The right side is what the customer and clients can see when they look up their Access Pass online. Next slide. This graph represents the 2 medical assistant clients. It shows how each one took about 2 years to hit their plateau. We were seeing about 3,500 unique cards per month with around 80,000 original rides each month. From the start of the program, we had provided over 5 million rides and received over $5.1 million in revenue. In the last 2 years, pre-COVID, the ridership represented about 2% of our total Metro Transit rides and revenue, with only 2 clients. Next slide. When we look at how they ride, we see about a 1-to-1 transfer ratio, since the clients might not live on the route their appointments are on. Or if they are in a close proximity to their appointment, they could make that round trip within the transfer period. When we take into account the transfers with one of our clients, they went from 65,000 original rides to 117,000 total rides. 88% of these were on bus, with 68% being on local buses and trains during the day and night and weekends when we have the most capacity. We saw an increase in both pilot clients of at least 10 times from where they were before Access Pass. This is a result in the simplicity of the program, where before Access Pass, they didn't invest into utilizing Metro Transit as much because of the administration. So they defaulted to taxis, which was their primary service. Now that they are on Access Pass, their clients, their only choice if they live on a bus or a train route is to use Metro Transit to get to their appointments, no longer utilizing taxis. Next slide. Our next step will be to convert other qualified organizations, like the remaining medical assistance providers, automate our reporting, and then we're working on adding Hennepin County Human Services, which is one of the largest organizations for Metro Transit. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Nick. Are there any questions? Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, I'm curious about the organizations that you would like to convert, and how many passes would be added when Hennepin County Human Services gets added?
Madam Chair and committee members, we are going to convert the remaining, there's, I believe, 5 or 6 major medical assistant providers. If they would like to join the program, which we already have interest from a few, we'll convert them over, along with other county human services if they would like to join. This is not a mandatory program for them, but when they see and they hear about the reduced admin and all the benefits, we envision most will want to join to that. And then as far as Hennepin County is confirmed, as far as Hennepin County goes, they have many different branches of their services in their human services division, and we're going to work with them to roll out throughout the program. And eventually it's their goal via different meetings we've had to convert all of Hennepin County Human Services over. I don't know that exact number of how many that will be, though.
Oh, yeah. If I may, Chair. I understand the organization on page 15 pays the bill. And that since they're billed after, they don't exactly know what their bill is. They just maybe have an account or something, and then when they reach their max, or how does that work?
Yeah, so Madam Chair and committee members, so the monthly max is built only on the fixed route side. So if someone was to ride 4 times at, say, the $2 fare, we would then bill the client for $8 for those 4 rides. Now, if that person was going to an appointment every day of the week, so 5 days a week, 4 weeks at 20 times, and they're doing 2 rides per day, that could be 40 rides, which would be, well, double that. But if they get over that monthly cap price, then we reduce the price down to that monthly cap. And then when they're not blindsided by this at all either. So we do have reports in place that they can generate a report or request a report for today and see what their whole usage for August has been from August 1st through August 9th. So that report's a day behind. So they're not blindsided by any of this. They can monitor and see who's riding before they get that end of month bill report.
Awesome.
All right, thank you. Just no questions or comments? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment really again, both of these programs, I think it is really shows the forward thinking of the department and ways to benefit users and the organizations, and it's creative and it lessens the burden for the organizations who can use this and certainly reduces barriers for those, and hopefully we can get more people enrolled in TAP, especially now. But I just really appreciate that we're always looking at what's the next best thing. How else can we accommodate people using transit? And I would guess that we're introducing lots of people who perhaps have not used transit before or not used it much, or who are finding more and creative ways that they can benefit from that. So thank you again to the staff for their creativity and thinking about new ways to expand the programs or develop new ones. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Molly. Additional questions or comments from council members? I will just say again, for both of these programs and just in general, some of the creativity that we've had to show as we've responded to COVID, both Metro Transit and MTS. I'm really quite proud of some of these things that all of you guys are doing. So thank you very much. All right, now we are on to the next information item, our Transportation Division 2021 preliminary operating budget. We have Ed Petrie and Heather Augustin-Huebner. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair. It's Ed Petrie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great, thank you. Once again, Ed Petrie, I'm Director of Finance with Metro Transit. I am joined today by Heather Augustin-Huebner. She's the Director of Finance with Metropolitan Transportation Services. And I'm also going to be joined by Leslie Kandaris, who is the Chief of Staff from Metro Transit. I'm going to go over the overview of the budget. I'll talk Metro Transit. Leslie will talk about equity on the Metro Transit side, and then Heather will go over the CARES Act, Metropolitan Transportation Services, and some equity slides on MTS. Some of the beginning comments I just want to make, as you know, as Wes referred to earlier in the evening this evening, is that this is just not a 2021 budget. This has been a very challenging preparation of the budget for us. This is not only a 21 budget, but it's also a rebalancing of 2020. As you recall, about a month ago, a couple weeks ago, Heather and I actually came before the Transportation Committee and the Management Committee and discussed a preliminary budget adjustment, which was reflecting the CARES Act money. So we were basically really looking at rebalancing 2020 and developing a 2021 budget, but also realizing that it's very difficult to budget in this cycle right now because there are so many unknowns. We don't know what the impacts are going to be of the pandemic with ridership, MVEST, many different items as we had previously discussed. And one of the things that you're going to hear a very similar theme through most of this budget this evening is that their proposed 2021 budget is very reliant upon a one-time use of funds. We're using one-time funds within the CARES Act, but we're also using our one-time funds with our general fund reserves. So we'll go into that in a lot more detail as we move forward. Next slide. First, I'll just give you a quick look at the schedule. During the July-August time period, we'll be coming before the committees, reviewing our budget reviews, talking about some information items. On August 26th, you'll be presented the preliminary operating budgets, and you'll be adopting the maximum tax levies. September, October, Heather and I will be back to both the Transportation Committee and the Council to discuss our capital budget and our 6-year CIP program. In October, it all goes out for a public comment. And then on December 9th, I believe the date is, that we will then come back to the Council, discuss any changes with the budget, and the Council will then adopt the budget on December 9th for 2021. Next slide. Some of the slides I'll talk about here for the basis for the budget development include both the Minnesota statutes for the regional administrator, the Metropolitan Council, the policies and actions that you have taken as a council, and some of the legislation and financial outlooks that we're using to base both our 2020 changes, but mainly our 2021 budget. Next slide. First of all, the administrator role, this is per statute 473-125. It says the regional administrator shall recommend to the council for adoption measures deemed necessary for efficient administration of the council, keep the council fully apprised of the financial condition of the council, and prepare and submit an annual budget to the council for approval. So this is part of the process that we are bringing forward to discuss with the committees, the recommended budget for 2021. The regional administrator will then bring that forward for the council approval. Next slide. Okay, let's start talking some of the basis for the budget development with some of the council actions. First of all, the council has adopted the transportation performance standards through the transportation policy plan. There's regional standards that have been evaluated and developed to compare routes to performance standards. This includes both service operated by the Metropolitan Council and the suburban transit providers. It's a regional standard. Routes not meeting those standards are reviewed for potential changes, as you are aware. And we also do what's called a regional route performance analysis annually, where we'll compare all the routes, whether they're urban routes, local routes, and express routes, and compare them to the standards. Another item that you're very aware of is labor agreements. We have labor agreements with the ATU, TMSA, the police, AFSCME, non-rep, and you're very familiar right now. We are in the middle of negotiations right now, for example, with the ATU. Fair policy review. This is something that we occasionally will review with the council, talking about fair policy, talking about, for example, you just heard information on some potential new fair products and different things that we're looking at. The council does have a target fund balance policy where we have set minimum targets for the respective transit family. We will talk about that this evening. And then the CARES Act fund. As you are aware, the council did receive $226 million in CARES Act funding, of which $214 stayed with the council. $12 million is going to the regional providers via subrecipient grants. And later in the presentation, Heather will talk a little more about those $214 million and how we plan to expend that in our 2020 and 2021 budgets. The next slide. As I talked about a few minutes ago, we also base our budget on forecasts and legislation. So our preliminary budget's been reviewed with all of our forecasts, all of our financial plans. One of the things with the legislation, I believe you will recall that with the last legislative session, not this one, but the previous one, the legislature actually separated the state appropriations, broke it down, not just so it wasn't just for transit, but actually identified a portion for Metro Mobility and a portion for the light rail system. We will talk about that. I do have a slide on that following in a few minutes. One of the things that we have been consistently talking with the committee and with the council about is that with all the changes, all the financial plans, all the forecasts we received from the legislature, the structural problem is that the legislature still did not address our structural deficit in the future biennium. One of the things that we had talked about last year when we adopted the budget was the fact that we had done, via our forecasts and all our forecasting we had done, we had identified that we had a structural deficit. We were looking at the structural deficit around the July 2021 timeline. But as a result of one-time funds and mainly as a result of the CARES Act funds, we've been able to take that structural deficit and push it back about 6 months to about January of 2022. Other financial considerations that we'll talk about in tonight's budget, again, are the state general fund appropriations, motor vehicle sales tax, the CARES Act, and our overall financial outlook. So the next slide. Okay, first with state general fund appropriations. That's appropriated by the legislature on a biennial basis. Per legislation, it must cover 50% of the net operating assistance for light rail, which does exclude the Metro Green Line extension, but it's for our current Green Line, our current Blue Line. One of the things that we talked about is that with the Metro Mobility, with the state general fund, they actually did break out they broke out a portion for Metro Mobility in the last session and a portion for the light rail and commuter rail. One of the things that we're finding is that with our current forecast right now, Metro Mobility is currently on a path between Metro Mobility and light rail. They will entirely consume the general fund by state fiscal year 2022. One of the other important things that we'll talk about in tonight's budget is that the bus operations relies totally on motor vehicle sales tax. Bus operations does not receive any state general fund because it is used currently by Metro Mobility, light rail, commuter rail, and as we said, Metro Mobility starting in state fiscal year is on a path to begin consuming the entire state general fund unless we get additional state appropriations from the legislature. Next slide. So here's a chart that we actually shared with you last year, but we'll just review it once again. The base for Metro Mobility with the last legislative session for state fiscal years 20 and 21 set a base for Metro Mobility of about $57 million. We did receive one-time funds in the last legislative session a year ago is we did receive money for Metro Mobility, a one-time funding of about $36 million, of which we used the first $23 million in state fiscal year 2020, and the last $13 million in state fiscal year 2021. The important thing in this slide, though, is you'll see starting in state fiscal year 2022, Metro Mobility returns to its $56 million base. So we did receive the one-time funding. That one-time funding no longer carries, it does not carry forward the legislation. It returns down to a lower base. The other interesting things you'll note on this slide is light rail and commuter rail. They're flat at $25 million and $7 million respectively, flat with no inflation going forward. So that is one of the other challenges that we're seeing on both light and commuter rails. The fact is that the state appropriations do not recognize inflation. And then the bus side, you will see no funding on the bus side. And we did receive a one-time $200,000 pass-through to MVTA that was passed through in state fiscal year 2020. But the big story on this slide is this fact that, first of all, they did break out Metro Mobility from light and commuter rail, but also then the Metro Mobility starting in fiscal year 22 will go back to its base of $56 million. Next slide. Okay, motor vehicle sales tax. If you recall, back in 2008, the council was moved over from real estate taxes over to motor vehicle sales tax or transit operations. We historically receive a state of Minnesota forecast every February and every November. Historically, we will use the February forecast to base our preliminary budget discussions with the committees and the council, and then we will then receive a November forecast, of which we will then use that November forecast to adjust in December before the council adopts. One of the odd things, or one of the different things that did happen this year due to the pandemic and due to the volatility of revenues and just the volatility in the economy, the state of Minnesota did issue a new MVEST, a new state forecast, on May 4th of 2020. So the discussions we're having this evening are based upon that May 4th, 2020 MVEST forecast, but we will come back once we get the new November forecast before you adopt in December. We'll discuss the new November forecast with the committee and with the council and discuss the potential changes it does have when we change or before you adopt the 2021 budget. One of the things that we also do, as we've talked about in the past, is we actually do a 5-year forecasting cycle. We'll not only look at the current year, but we'll actually look at the next 4 years. And one of the things that we also then forecast within that is we'll look at state appropriations, we'll look at all of our costs, we'll look at passenger fares, but we also forecast then motor vehicle sales tax. And we're actually working with MnDOT, and we work with MnDOT, and the forecast that they're using for the future years is the same forecast that we will use. So we also want to make sure that we're in lockstep with MnDOT on the future forecasts. As you recall, in the past, the council, we budget 95% of the motor vehicle sales tax forecast. The reason we do that is because of the volatility of motor vehicle sales tax. We want to have some budget certainty when we do a budget. Then any collections up and above that 95% that was budgeted would be used in the following year, in our following year's budget. As we talked about, this is a volatile revenue source, which is why we budget 95%. One of the things that we will continue to talk about is the fact that we do have a future cliff coming, and we do need additional sales tax or some other type of dedicated and stable revenue source because of our fiscal cliff that is coming. Next slide. Okay, tracking our financial outlook, as I just talked about in the previous slide, is that we actually do, as I said, we actually do a total of 5-year forecast. We use the current years plus the next 2 bienniums. And we look at all of our funding according to state law, which would be both state appropriations and motor vehicle sales tax. But we also then will revise it with every 6 months when we get a motor vehicle sales tax forecast, we'll revise our forecasts. We'll also then forecast any structural financial positions we have. And we'll detail all of our funding assumptions and use of reserves. And we call this, actually, it's called our toolbox. So then we will then identify if we have issues, what tools we can use potentially to balance our budget in the future years. Some of the significant changes, though, that as we've discussed that we're having with our financial outlook is motor vehicle sales tax. If you recall, when we did the budget amendment last month, we had basically talked about that the state of Minnesota had forecasted that significant decline from April. It was almost between a 40 and 50% decline in motor vehicle sales tax in April through June. Starting in July, which is state fiscal year 21, they forecasted a 17% decrease in motor vehicle sales tax. As Mr. Cloyster mentioned earlier in the meeting, MVS receipts have actually been coming in better than what the state has forecasted, but we are watching this very, very closely every month, and we're very interested to see what's happening monthly, but also what will happen with the November forecast. As we address our budget this evening, we'll talk about reserves, and I will point out on the Metro Transit side, and Heather will do the same thing on her side with MTS, one-time use of reserve funds on a one-time use of monies. We'll talk about the Federal CARES Act revenue. Service levels, we continually watch our service levels as we have talked about. That one of the things you'll find out within our budget this evening is that we're forecasting going forward with an 80% service level on the bus side and forecasting our rail systems currently at 100%. We are looking at those. We're also currently looking at Northstar, as Mr. Cloyster has mentioned. We have an increased use of program reserves in the budget. You're going to see basically with our reserve levels, we're pretty well taking us down to the council minimums. A little bit of room left at the end of 2021, but we'll pretty well be at council minimums by the end of the year. And we do have the fiscal cliff that we'll point out in 2022. So the next slide. So with some of the impacts that we're seeing with COVID with the COVID impacts in both 2020 and 2021, some of the items that are increasing, as we talked about, we have a federal transit revenues, the CARES Act money, we're bringing that in. We have an increasing use of reserves. We also have increasing overhead expenses, cleaning, protective supplies, and the COVID time for people to clean the vehicles, clean the trains, clean the platforms, clean the buildings. So that is all increasing items that are built into our 2020 and 2021 budgets. Decreasing on the other side is we're recognizing a decrease in motor vehicle sales tax. Ridership and passenger revenue, as we've talked about, significantly decreasing in the budgets. We're looking at our service. As I said, we're looking at about an 80% service on bus side. And we're also looking at consulting projects if we can delay anything, and also looking at some salary and administrative overhead reductions. Next slide. So the next slide here, talking about the COVID summary. This next bullet pretty well summarizes, to me, is the essence of the 2021 budget. We're trying to present this evening a safe and conservative assumptions in our budget, but it's based on what we do not know. That is, from a financial perspective and from a finance person, this is very difficult because you always want to base your budget based upon facts, based upon good forecasts that you know. But with this budget that we're presenting this evening, as Mr. Cloyster has said, and also as Ms. Bogie has also mentioned, the fact is that between now and the end of the year, we know our assumptions will change. We assume ridership could change, motor vehicle sales tax could change. Those are items that we will bring forward and we will discuss with the council and the committee between now and December 9th. This, as I discussed, this budget is not only, it's not only a one-year budget, but it's a two-year balancing of 20 and 21. One of the other ironic things is that, but for CARES Act funds, we would have been in a significant problem in 2020. We have forecasted, if you recall from the amendment that Heather and I brought forward to the council back on July 22nd, we programmed $140 million of CARES Act funds to be used in calendar year 2020. That was in excess, that exceeded our available reserve balances. So, but for the CARES Act money, we would have been out of money by the end of 2020. So significant use of one-time money. We're very fortunate to have received that money. One of the things that we're, as a result of within our budgets that we're seeing is our current forecast is assumed a 2-year loss. Now this is looking at 20 and 21. Motor vehicle sales tax, we would lose over $103 million. Passenger fares over $138 million. So it's significant losses, as we also talked about too with the service. Buses going down from 100% to 80%. Within our budget models, that did save us about $42 million. But one of the things I do want to point out, though, was, excuse me, this was largely offset by added costs for social distancing and for cleaning. For example, we have built into our budget, we're running, for example, bus service at an 80% level, but we're also running on top of that an additional 5% service on top of the 85% for social distancing. Because we are continually working with strategic initiatives. We're actually watching the load counts on our routes on a daily basis. And we're ready to put out more service on the street if the loads get beyond the social distancing guidelines. And also then we do have additional costs, as we talked about, in there for cleaning, maintenance of the vehicles and facilities. On MTS, they had savings about $6 million from the pre-COVID costs, but also they are also experiencing additional costs for cleaning and for the social distancing. Next slide.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm going to take Heather Augustin-Hebner, Finance Director for MTS. I'm going to take the next handful of slides. So Ed set me up really good to talk about the Federal CARES Act. But for the Federal CARES Act, our hard conversation this year would have been even harder. So most of these slides we walked through with you at the budget amendment presentation that Ed just talked about, but in the context of the broader budget, we thought it would be a good quick refresher for you. So I'll go through these fairly quickly. The Federal CARES Act was signed into law in March, and Minnesota was appropriated about $308 million out of $25 billion. Funds will be passed to the council through a grant, and then we pass that additional money through to regional providers through subrecipient agreements. There's established federal protocols, established federal rules, so we are just really in a place where we are following those rules. Next slide, please. So the FDA allocated the money based on a federal formula, and we basically just mirrored the federal formula at the local level. So what that really means is every year, all of the transit organizations, we enter all the same data metrics into a national collection system, and then that becomes the basis for the federal formula. And when you take that federal formula and you apply it at the local level, these are how the allocations come out between all of the regional providers. Next slide, please. So within the council itself, we first budgeted the Federal CARES Act based upon lost revenue. And then what we had, so that's the first cut, and that's what you see here in this formula distribution. And then the second cut that we need to make is to make each fund whole through 2021. Like, for example, when we looked at Metro Mobility for 2021, it was a couple $1 million shy of being whole. So we ended up programming a couple million extra in Federal CARES Act to METMO. So if there may be some rebalancing a little bit of what this looks like between the preliminary budget and the final budget that you will be asked to adopt later this year. But this is really directionally accurate about how much of the funds we imagine is going to be in each fund. Next slide, please. So we feel that our strategy is consistent with the CARES Act goals. We want to make sure that it's easy for us to explain, easy for you to explain, easy for people in the region to understand, easy for us to explain to the FTA. And this is really, as Ed said, I'm not going to repeat what he said, but the Federal CARES Act is really how we're making our budgets balance this year. But for the Federal CARES Act, we'd be having a really, really difficult budget conversation this year. So we're going to make it through 20, we're going to make it through 21, but calendar year 2022, we still have a fiscal cliff that we're going to continue to watch and continue to have conversations about. Next slide, please. And
want to take this? You want me to?
Oh, go right ahead.
Okay. Okay. The next slide here that we're talking about then is the operating reserves by fund. So basically what we're seeing here is as of by mode, you have through the 2021 budget, Metro Mobility will virtually be at, you'll see the 2021 budget and our target. Metro Mobility will virtually be down at council minimums of $9.4 million. We see rail operations is a little higher than the $9.5 million budget. This is at $15.1 million, but if you recall, then we share on the funding on the rail operations between the council and the respective counties. Bus operations Metro Transit bus operations is slightly above its minimum target, and this is mainly due to administrative adjustments, administrative reductions that we're looking at achieving in 2020 and 2021. And then you'll see contracted services and planning are at their minimum levels. So virtually, other than like Metro Transit bus through some administrative savings, we're virtually going to be right on top of minimum targets at the end of 2021. The challenges we talked about, though, then moving into 2022, will be at minimum targets, and CARES Act money will be gone. So, but for some other intervention, we will have our fiscal cliff now starts January of 2022. Next slide. So now I will go into the transportation operating division, and then we will go from there into Metro Transit. Next slide. So our overall budget, we support Thrive MSP 2040. We also support the transportation policy plan that we've talked about. Through the Thrive lens, we preserve service while growing ridership and meeting needs across the region. We prioritize structural solutions with a multi-year forecast. We minimize impact on levies, and we maintain reserves at policy levels. As you saw in the a couple of slides previous, we're able to maintain our reserves at the policy levels as of the end of 2021, but for CARES Act, we would not have been able to. But as we said, starting in 2022, we have our challenge. Next slide. The overall budget framework. As we have discussed in prior years, we roll up our major budget. Heather and I do a very detailed budget of revenues and expenses by line item, by department, then we roll it up into an overall large budget, major categories of revenues, major expenses. We have very tight parameters on our budget development, which is all based upon the revenue growth, which is information from the MVES, State Appropriations and Fares, our labor, and our service contracts. We've included the COVID impact of operations into these budgets, into our proposal. We're going to continue daily cleaning and disinfecting of vehicles, facilities, and stations. We assume that what we're doing today will continue in the near term moving forward. As Wes pointed out earlier in his comments, we have returned to front door boarding. We're assuming 80% bus levels in 2021, 100% on the rail lines. And we will have our challenges meeting Metro Mobility demand, which we had last year, but also then Heather will talk about in a few minutes when she gets to Metro Mobility. Next slide. Okay, mitigating revenues and expenses. One of the things that we watch very closely in our budgets is ways that we can mitigate revenue, mitigate expenses. Motor vehicle sales tax, as we talked about, is we budget everything at 95%. Actual receipts up and above the 95% are available for the next year's budget. We fuel price hedge at Metro Transit. Metro Transit, and here at the council, we are the largest consumer of diesel in the state of Minnesota. We consume over 7 million gallons of diesel fuel on an annualized basis. So one of the things that we do is we actually fuel forward price these gallons of diesel up to 90% of the volume for the next 24 months. The main reason we do that is for budget certainty, so we know what our cost of fuel is, because it is a very major player in our budget. As Heather talked about, we're programming CARES Act funds in 2020 and 2021. We programmed $140 million in 2020, and we will program the balance of the $74 million in this budget. We anticipate that we will probably expend those funds probably in about the July-August timeline of 2021. They will be fully expended, then we will begin eating down reserves. And then we talked about our reserve targets. Next slide. Okay, now we move into the overall transportation budget. This is our consolidated budget. It's a $614.8 million budget. And let's see. So we have overall motor vehicle sales tax of $231 million, about 38%. That's our largest source of revenues. We have state money, state appropriations of $96 million. The federal money, you'll see it's $107 million. This is made up of the $74 million worth of CARES Act money, but it's also made up of $20-some million worth of staff time that are actually working on capital projects that we're recognizing here. For example, like building garages, like for example, like the new Minneapolis bus garage. We're recognizing those capitalized salaries in this budget, but then we will draw federal funds down to pay for those. And then we also then have about $4 million worth of CMAQ dollars in there for marketing. One of the things you're noticing here is fares. Over our overall system, we're forecasting a fare recovery next year of only 7% as a result of the decline in ridership. Other revenues, $4.4 million, is largely advertising revenue. That is bus side and rail side advertising. The other funds transfer is $19.4 million. That is money that is coming from the motor vehicle sales tax reserves. As I said, we budget 95%. Anything in excess of the 95% goes into the reserve and is available for next year's operations. So this is money that was in excess of the 95% last year that is now available for this year's operations. We're using about $65 million worth of our base general fund reserves. And then the county slice is $46 million. This is the county's share of operating subsidy that they share on both the Blue Line and the Green Line and Northstar Commuter Rail. On the expense side, we're a very labor-intensive organization. $343 million, or 56% of our budget, is salaries and benefits. There's that capital portion that I talked about, like, for example, people working on the Haywood Garage, the new Minneapolis bus garage. We're recognizing their salaries, but then they'll be paid via federal dollars. The Green Line budget next year is forecasted at $48 million, Blue at $44, Northstar just over $22, Metro Mobility in at $93 million. And then you have the MTS regular route service of $23, Transit Link of $8, and transportation planning just over $10 million. So we have just over a $614.8 million proposed budget in 2021. Next slide. Okay, let's go down to some of the Metro Transit specifics. Next slide. So for the Metro Transit budget assumptions that we have built in, and then Heather will also then go over the MTS side. First of all, we have built in the COVID response impact on operations, all the additional costs that we're incurring for cleaning, maintenance, all the different supplies, but also all the other impacts that we're seeing due to reduced ridership, reduced motor vehicle sales tax, CARES Act money. We're accumulating all that into the 2021 budget. Return to front door boarding. We talked about the service levels. We also, as I mentioned, we'd have additional 5% budgeted for bus trips to maintain social distancing next year. So the moral of that story is basically an 80% service level moving forward is not an 80% service level. We have additional service planned because of the social distancing requirement. We're forecasting ridership just north of 28.8 million rides. Diesel fuel at $2.13 a gallon. Last year was $2.30. Our forecast next year is for $2.13. We're assuming the continued county funding for the Blue, Green, and Northstar per their master operating funding agreements that we do have. And those current master operating funding agreements, it's a 5-year agreement that grows through calendar year 2022. We're assuming the Southwest Light Rail FFGA that Mr. Kleisser talked about earlier. We're going to continue. One of the things that's hard for us to remember is the fact is that our light rail vehicles, commuter rail vehicles, we always think these services are brand new, but these vehicles are going through many different overhaul programs that we receive federal funding for, state of good repair funds, to keep our assets in a state of good repair. So we will continue going through the light rail and the commuter rail overhaul programs in 2021. program of CARES Act that we've talked about, and our use of reserves in 2021. Next slide. I'm sighing here. This is the tough slide to talk about. First of all, one point I do want to make about on the previous slide, though, as we're looking at our financial position, as we're looking at the Metro Transit financial position, we do want to make the point that, you know, we firmly feel this is not our long-term future financial position, but it's our response to the pandemic. As the pandemic prolongs, we'll continue to review and refine our budget process and our financial positions, and we'll continue those discussions with the council and the committee before you adopt the budget. So moving on to the ridership, this is, as I mentioned, this is a tough slide to look at. You can see the 2019 actual, we came in at just over 77.9 million rides, a very nice year. You can see it on the green line, it was our highest ridership ever. Northstar was consistent with the prior months. Blue line was next to our highest ridership ever. Very strong ridership on those lines. And right now, our amended budget right now is we're looking at about 32.3 million rides in 2020, down to about 28.8 million rides in 2021. The reason you're seeing the decline going from 2020 to 2021 is the fact that 2020 did have very strong ridership. When we started in calendar year 2020, January and February exceeded 2019 levels. So we had very strong ridership coming into 2020. March it started to stall, and then the pandemic hit. So you're seeing the decrease going from a couple years, a couple good months in 2020, and then 2021 with a full pandemic impact. Overall, in 2021, the Metro Transit family, we're forecasting our ridership to be down about 64% in calendar 2021. Next slide. So let's move on to the Metro Transit family of funds. Moving on to the Metro Transit family of funds, you'll see on the bus operations, as we talked about, bus operations receives no state general fund. They do receive motor vehicle sales tax, so we're very reliant upon this very volatile revenue source. It's about 61% of our budget, or $210 million. We do have passenger fares of $25 million. The bus system we're forecasting, as a result of ridership being down, we're forecasting about an 8% fare box recovery. We have federal funds in here of $4 million. This is for the transit CMAQ marketing. The other money of $3 million, that is some interest income, but it's mainly bus side advertising with our advertising contract. We had that fund transfer, the motor vehicle sales tax transfer. That's at 5% that we don't budget for motor vehicle sales tax from 2020. We're going to recognize that in 21. We are using a one-time use of reserves of $34 million, one-time use of CARES Act money of $46 million. So built into the 2021 budget for bus operations for Metro Transit, we have approximately an $80 million one-time use of funds next year. So as I talked about, we have enough money to get us through calendar 2021, but starting in 2022, we have our fiscal cliff, as you can see noted by this with the one-time use of funds. On the expense side, very labor intensive, but our budget is about $268 million of labor and benefits, all our operators, mechanics, cleaners, administrative staff. We have our bus materials of about $15 million, utility costs of $3 million. We have regional allocations of about $42 million. That includes all of our costs for our IS, for corporate budget, for legal costs, payroll, purchasing, accounts payable support. All those costs come from regionally. As we've discussed before, it's much cheaper for an organization to have a central service and then allocate it based on use versus every one of the business units having their own standalone departments. It's much more efficient to have it regionally and allocated back. And then fuel, as we talked about, is a very large portion of our budget, $13.8 million. Next slide. Okay, let's go into the Metro Blue and the Metro Green. This first slide is the Metro Blue line budget. This is from Metro Blue Light Rail. You'll notice on the revenue side, it's a little different than the bus because we have, first of all, we have the introduction of the state general fund appropriations of $12.7 million. But we also then have the county's piece. As you recall, Metro Blue Line is funded 50% by the council or the state, and then 50% from Hennepin County. So you'll notice then the county's portion is 36% next year. The council is matching that at 36%, but we're using $29 million worth of state appropriations and then $7 million of reserves. So we're able to match the county's contribution. We're both in at 36%. In addition, we're bringing in $6.6 million or 15% for CARES Act money. Passenger fares is just north of $5 million or a 12% fare box recovery. And then other revenues, about $500,000, which would be advertising. So if you look at the reserves and the CARES Act money, we have just short of $10 million, $9.8 million next year of one-time money built into our 2021 budget. Thereby, we do have that fiscal challenge moving into 22. On the expense side, just consistent with our bus operations, very labor intensive again. 55% of our budget, or $24 million, is salaries and bennies. Instead of having diesel fuel, we have the propulsion, which electrifies the trains, $1.8 million. We have our utility costs, regional allocations coming in. All other costs, which would be our lease costs and insurance costs and those types of items, are $4.7 million. We have our supplies and materials of $3 million, and the modal allocation. Those are for shared costs across the Metro Transit family. The biggest piece of that would be, for example, police, our police department. The police department is housed in the Metro Transit bus operations, but then we allocate it across to bus, light rail, commuter rail. So this is the light rail. The biggest piece of it is them picking up their portion of the police allocation. Next slide. Now you'll notice then the green line, which is very, very similar to the blue line, the same type of the pots of money. We have state funding in at $26 million and use of reserves of 4.9, which gives us the 26 and the 10%. That's 36%. You go to the county side, $17.1 million, so 36%. So once again, we are matching. The council is matching the counties. Passenger fares in with a fare box recovery of $5.8 million or 12%. Other revenues of $700,000, which is a little interest income, but mainly advertising or rail side advertising. As I said, we're using reserves of 4.9, CARES Act funding of $6.6 million. So on the green line next year, we have one-time funds of $11.5 million. So as you can see also, but for the CARES Act money, we would not have made it through 2021 on the green line. Expenses, the same as the blue line, labor intensive, $28.6 million or 60% of our budget is salaries and benefits. We have the propulsion costs, utilities, regional allocation, other costs, which again is insurance and some lease costs, materials and supplies to keep to repair the trains as we're working, and modal allocations, which is largely the police allocation. Let's go to our next slide, which will be green, or will be Northstar. Northstar commuter rail, it looks very similar to the light rail lines, but it's a little different. The fact is that we have the state appropriations coming at 7.1, but now you also see the introduction of Sherburne County and Greater Minnesota MnDOT. One of the things I will mention on the green line slide, the county's contribution, blue line I mentioned was Hennepin County, green line it's Hennepin County and Ramsey County. Now when we get to Northstar, you have the Sherburne County contribution, you have the Greater Minnesota MnDOT contribution. This is for the portion of the MnDOT or for the Northstar service that is outside of the 7-county transit taxing district. Then you have the county's contribution in at 8.5%. That is shared between Hennepin County and Anoka County. You see we have fares in at $1 million or 4% fare box recovery. Use reserves of $1.4 million and CARES Act money of $1 million. So we have a one-time contribution of funds next year, one-time monies of about $2.4 million. The expense side of Northstar is about $22.5 million, the same as the revenues, but this is a little different than our bus and the rail lines. The reason is you'll notice BNSF. On the blue line and the green line, our own staff run our trains up and down the track. But with Northstar, we have to actually contract with BNSF because we're on federal right-of-way. So we actually have a contract with BNSF to run the service. That is about $6.5 million. We do have staff and benefits of about $5.9 million. That is our staff, our maintenance staff, our cleaning crew, our administrative staff, all the people that are maintaining the vehicles to keep them in a state of good repair. Regional allocations, as we talked about, they again now will have diesel fuel instead of propulsion. They have diesel fuel of $1.3 billion. Other costs, which a lot of that is insurance. Is some advertising costs and some miscellaneous costs. Insurance is 1.7, supplies of $2 million, and allocations of 1.7, which largely is police. Next slide. So this is a snapshot of the overall consolidated Metro Transit bus and rail budget. You'll see that we have our motor vehicle sales tax, state general funds, and the counties in at $288 million for the year. That is an increase of about $26 million over the prior year. We do have passenger fares, then our Federal CARES Act, which is programming additional funds to give us total revenues of $414 million, or about $37 million less than the prior year. And then we have our expenses, overall net expenses about $457 million, or just under $16 million decrease from the prior year. We have an overall use of reserves in the Metro Transit bus and rail next year of $43 million, one-time use of money. And then included then is we have the additional federal CARES money that we've talked about that we are using. Next slide. The only difference in this slide now is you'll see we have the first column is the same as the previous slide, but now we've introduced the people that are working on the capital programs. For example, the new Minneapolis bus garage. We're recognizing their salaries and benefits and their allocations of $22.5 million, but then we're recognizing the amount that we'll get from Greater Minnesota or from the counties, then also the amount that we're going to get from the federal government from federal grants that we do have. So the overall consolidated budget for Metro Transit next year, including the people working on the capital programs, is just over $480 million. Next slide.
All right. Thank you, Ed. And good afternoon, Chair Barber and council members. My name is Leslie Canderas. I'm the Chief of Staff for the Metro Transit General Manager. And to close out the Metro Transit slides, I'm going to share with you how we are working towards developing a more deliberate equity analysis of our budgets moving forward. Back in June, General Manager Koistra directed his staff to take several immediate steps to strengthen our efforts to embed equity in our work. And one of the General Manager's initial equity action steps is performing an equity analysis for the 2021 operating budget and the 2021 through 2026 capital improvement program. Fundamentally, we recognize that our budgets represent our priorities. And while we've considered equity in budgets previously, and we are charged to do that in Thrive and in the Council's existing equity policy, what is really new work now is this effort to develop a more deliberate and thoughtful and intentional approach to this work. And to that end, just to be really clear, nothing I'm going to present today in the next few minutes represents what we would consider to be an equity analysis. We're not satisfied where we are with this work yet, but rather these slides are really here to illustrate some of our initial early work to move towards this more deliberate and intentional approach moving forward. Next slide, please. So as we think about how we will devise a budget equity analysis, this really requires us to think about who we serve. This slide provides a sketch of some of the quantitative information we have on who rides Metro Transit. Just a couple key points. Our ridership is more racially diverse than the region as a whole. About 45% of our riders are people of color, Indigenous people, or people who identify as multiple races. This is compared to about 27% in the 7-county region as a whole. Furthermore, 56% of our riders are young. They're ages 13 to 35. 41% of our riders live in households that make less than $35,000 per year annually. 2/3 of our riders live in households that make less than $100,000 per year. In terms of trip purpose, we know most of our rides are related to work or school, about 60%. And we also know that only 1/3 are associated with a 9-to-5 type commute. So transit really does serve a variety of needs and purposes. just to say a few words about the data, the data on this slide is from the 2016 TBI Onboard survey. So it's important to keep in mind that this is pre-pandemic data. But overall, this sketch of our ridership pattern suggests that the very mission of providing transit service in itself has the potential to contribute to equity in our region, though we also absolutely need to be intentional in how we go about doing that. Next slide, please. So when we are thinking about how to do more deliberate equity analysis of our budget, the primary driver of our operating budget is the amount of service we are planning to deliver. As Ed mentioned earlier, the 2021 preliminary budget assumes a transit service level of approximately 80% of our pre-pandemic level services for bus. Just for context, today, Metro Transit schedules represent about 65% of our pre-pandemic levels of service. And the quarterly service change that will go into effect this September will restore some additional service, bringing us up to about 80% of pre-pandemic levels of service for bus. And to be clear, throughout 2021, we will conduct our quarterly service adjustments. So there will be additional service changes in 2021 on top of the September 2020 pick. And again, this whole budget you're seeing today is still very preliminary at this stage. But for illustration purposes, I'm going to focus a bit on the September pick today, just to give you a sense of how we're thinking about approaching an 80% level of service for bus. By the September pick, we will return to weekday pre-stay-at-home order levels on most core local bus routes. The September pick will really focus on our highest ridership routes, or the routes we've seen the least amount of ridership decline during COVID. Commuter express routes, however, will remain at the June 2020 levels in the September pick. And this is largely a reflection of the demand, or more precisely, the lack of demand we are seeing in those express services. We will continue to monitor demand and return to on-site work patterns to evaluate additional commuter service moving forward. But in September, most of the routes are suspended today will remain suspended. Next slide, please. So this slide and the next slide will go together. So while the preliminary 2021 budget assumes a service level of 80% of our pre-pandemic service for bus, not all routes are going to see the same level of service restoration. So again, this slide and the next slide focuses on our September pick, not our 2021 budget, but just gives you kind of a sense again of how we're approaching this. So our highest ridership routes, both pre-pandemic and during COVID, are routes serving communities that rely heavily on transit. As this first slide is just giving you a sense of the data we have from our transit onboard survey again. And what you're looking at are race and ethnicity by route classifications. As you move from left to right on this chart, you're moving to route classifications that have fewer riders of color and more white riders. And again, just a couple of caveats on this. This is 2016 data. So not only is this pre-COVID, but this also, the BRT bar chart on here does not include the C line, which would make that bar a little bit different. Next slide, please. So this slide is comparing the amount of trips we had in September 2019 to the number of trips we're anticipating in the September 2020 pick by route classification. And the data are showing September 2020 service as a percent of September 2019 service. So while the schedule going into effect in September 2020 will be about 80% of our pre-COVID service overall, what this shows is you can see that some route classifications will have more of their service restored or be at higher service levels than others. So as I mentioned, this slide is meant to kind of match up with the last one, and the horizontal axis is organized in the same way as the prior slide, meaning as you move from right, or as you move right on the horizontal axis, you're moving to route classifications with higher proportions of white riders based on pre-COVID data. So as I've said throughout these slides, we're not considering this information in itself to constitute an equity analysis, but we're trying to just give you a sense of the ways we're starting to think about this. And what this suggests is, as we're looking at going into our September pick, while the system overall will be at about 80% of our previous service, the routes that are serving more people of color and Indigenous people are going to be closer to what we were running pre-COVID. Next slide, please. So while the prior slides were focused on the level of service at the preliminary budget, will potentially fund. In addition to our service plan, the preliminary budget also supports investments and programs that contribute to advancing equity. And some of these are supported by our capital improvement program as well. And many of these, if not all of them, will be quite familiar to you. But just to walk through them briefly, Arterial Bus Rapid Transit. Arterial BRT is a package of transit enhancements that adds up to a faster trip and improved experience for our riders. The A line opened 2016 and the C line opened just a year ago. The D line and the B line are next in line and would serve our two busiest bus routes today, both of which operate in areas that have lost significant community assets during the recent civil unrest. The D line, when you look at the demographics, 57% of the corridor's residents are people of color and indigenous. 1 in 4 households in the corridor does not have access to an automobile, and the D line would connect residents in the corridor to 200,000 jobs. The B line, 42% of the corridor's residents are people of color, indigenous. 19% of the households on the B line corridor do not have access to an automobile, and the B line would provide access to over 130,000 jobs. Better Bus Stops is a program that improves the transit customer experience by investing in accessibility, transit information, and shelters. This is a program that you've heard about before. It started back in 2014 and was really focused on providing shelter investments in neighborhoods containing areas of concentrated poverty where the majority of residents are people of color. And since the inception, Better Bus Stops has upgraded over 12,000 bus stops with new signage, route numbers, a unique stop number, and contact information. Stops with 10 or more daily boardings have additional information, including route map information on service frequency, route direction, route destinations. Over 100 shelters have been added, and other shelters have been improved with heat and light. Better Bus Routes and Speed and Reliability Program. When we look at that 2016 travel behavior inventory data again, we see that our riders of color, indigenous riders, ride routes that tend to be slower and less reliable than our commuter express routes that serve a higher proportion of white riders. So Service Development has developed the Better Bus Routes Speed and Reliability Initiative to increase speed and reliability on key routes, which will directly affect customer satisfaction and operator satisfaction. Transit Assistance Program, you already heard a presentation on this tonight, but it's another key program that Metro Transit continues to invest in. The Homeless Action Team started back in 2018. As unsheltered homelessness has increased throughout the region, this is increasingly visible on transit vehicles. And the creation of the HAT team not only is connecting people to services, but in partnership with the Metro HRA has led to providing over 90 households with housing vouchers. And finally on here, preparing for administrative citations. In 2019, we worked with the governor to introduce a policy bill that would allow us to issue administrative citations for fare evasion instead of the current criminal citation. The notion of decriminalizing fare evasion is a frequently mentioned tactic among our peers when it comes to advancing transit equity. And while we saw movement on this proposal during the 2020 session, including in the House's supplemental budget proposal or budget bill during the first special session, we to date do not have administrative citation authority. So we'll continue to seek that at the legislature and also concurrently examine what we can do in the meantime to try to start building towards a program even absent that authority. Next slide, please. And through all this work that we do, our budget also supports many practices and components that are crucial to supporting equitable outcomes. So public engagement, all the examples in that last slide, bus rapid transit projects, Better Bus Stops, TAP, and others are really anchored in public engagement. We adhere to Thrive in the Council's public engagement plan, which commits us to making decisions with people, not for people. And really in general, public engagement is at the core of advancing equity work. And we know without meaningful, authentic engagement and relationship building, we simply won't know what communities expect of us and what we are, if we're hitting the mark. DBE and MCUB utilization, one important component of transit equity is ensuring the public dollars of which we are stewards of are being spent in the communities we serve. And we're working closely with the Office of Equal Opportunity to establish more regular reporting to Metro Transit senior staff so we can better track and improve our DBE and MCUB performance. Diverse hiring, retention, promotion. We are working closely with HR to evaluate these processes to ensure that we're doing what we can to advance workforce equity, diversity, and inclusion. And finally, I'll just mention that Metro Transit has had an equity and inclusion team comprised of employees from a cross-section of our garages, facilities, and police since 2015. And in the recent months, the general manager has tasked the equity and inclusion team with coordinating a process to help harness some of the energy many of our employees are feeling into a list of recommended action steps that we will share with senior leaders in September. And along with this, staff are actively looking to identify and develop equity performance measures. I know service development is planning to start providing an equity analysis alongside with quarterly service changes and just several other aspects in addition to how we're starting to approach our budget pieces. So with that, this is very much a work in progress, but again, we wanted to give you a glimpse at this stage of what we're considering and would like to stay in touch as we continue to move forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Heather, before we move on to your section, I know that we have questions. Councilmember Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just had a question. I guess it's more for General Manager Fletcher. So, you know, we have 45% of our riders are BIPOC and 27% of the people in the region. And you know, equity is not a new thing for Metro Transit, but achieving equity goals may be sort of newer. I guess what are we going to do differently so that our leadership looks more like the people in our region, and particularly like our riders, and our spend more accurately reflects the diversity in our region and our riders at Metro Transit? What's going to happen differently? It's great to have the same goals that we've had year after year, but what are we doing differently in implementing this budget to achieve?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Ferguson, I think, you know, equity is the issue of advancing equity has to be part of how we do business. So while we may not have a line item that says advancing equity, we have components as Leslie has mentioned, many components of that really work to advance equity. I think in terms of changing the face of leadership here, it's how we hire on an opportunity basis. It's that includes how we advertise, how we make sure we have applicant pools that are diverse and represent our communities, and some of that has to be done, you know, one hire at a time. Unfortunately, I will say that the transit leadership team right now reflects a long history of transit not having a diverse leadership group, and you go forward with that as you have hiring opportunities. I think you make up for that by in the meantime by seeking input from a broad-based level of employees and others in the community who have thoughts and ideas and have more diverse backgrounds and more diverse lenses in terms of what we do, and taking that input seriously, which is what we're doing right now, both inside our organization and with our community engagement. But it's a tough discussion. It's tough work, and it's important work. And I think what we're trying to commit ourselves to doing is being more intentional about it, is measuring what we're doing, and being held accountable to results. And I think in the end, it's more about what we get done than what we say in that regard. I don't know if that's helpful to you.
Well, it is. So will we see then goals in each one of these categories, numeric goals that we can measure your success and your team's success against?
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, excuse me, Madam Chair.
Good.
Councilmember Ferguson, I think we've asked, there's two things that are going on right now in that regard in terms of measurement. I've asked the strategic initiatives group to work together and work with others and look at how we might best measure success in advancing equity and make those part of our key performance indicators as we go forward. And I think we'd be happy to share those with you. I think another example of measuring is applying an equity lens to our service development, and doing it certainly on an annual basis, but also applying that equity lens on a quarterly basis, because we make quarterly service adjustments, as you know, we do that throughout the year as seasons change demand and schools start and schools stop, and there's other certain factors that require quarterly service changes. But to be more deliberate and more intentional in that work. I think we're learning as we're going here. I'm not going to suggest we have all the answers. In fact, part of what we're doing right now and seeking input through our employees and through others is to try to understand better where we have problems. It's not just where we have problems, where we have untapped opportunities, and how we can best go about that and how we can prioritize that work, because we are working in limited resources. As you know from this budget presentation, we need to make priorities in what we can do to advance equity in ways that have the greatest impact on improving lives, not only the lives of our workers, but as important are the lives of our riders. And so that's the work we're trying to do. Again, I'm not suggesting that we understand how best to do that work completely, but we're working really hard to do that.
Great. Yeah, and I think just that measurement is a critical part, so we can just see the progress that's been made. It's not all going to happen next year, but you want to know you're on the path towards success.
Madam Chair, we'll be happy to keep reporting back on that. It's important to us.
Thank you, Councilmember Ferguson, for your comments. And I think that just in the conversations that I've had with General Manager Cloister, I think that's where we're headed, but we think it's an ongoing conversation. Like I like the position of seeing where there's gaps, but also untapped resources and things maybe that we need to look at differently. So I will definitely plan to be bringing stuff back to the committee a little more often as this process evolves. So. All right, are there additional questions or comments from council members right now?
Chair, this is Atlas Ingebretson, Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson.
Yep. Councilmember?
I have a couple questions. One, I just want to acknowledge that there's been a series of town hall meetings that weren't mentioned in this portion. First of all, I liked this presentation, so thank you very much. But there were a few things that were left out, and I want to know if that was intentional, if they're not seen as being connected to this. One of those things was the town hall meetings that have been taking place. Another is the community ambassador program. And the work that's been underway to identify and start a regular tracking for equity with Metro Transit police as it relates to stops by race and age. So could you share why those three things weren't included or talked about in the efforts underway?
Sure. Chair Barber, Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. I'll at least start that, and the general manager might want to supplement. In terms of the town halls, you're right, I didn't call that out specifically, not for any particular reason, but it really does fit within this final bullet here, the work that's being led by the Transit Equity and Inclusion Unit. At least the town hall that we had here at Metro Transit, there have been some council-wide town halls hosted by OEO and HR as well. But we did, the Equity and Inclusion Unit co-hosted a town hall with the general manager on July 29th. And that was an opportunity for the Equity and Inclusion team to share the initial results of the feedback we had received. The general manager had directed staff who had comments, concerns, ideas to really start funneling those to the Equity and Inclusion team through an email address and through an anonymous web form. We collected just short of 200 comments from about June 5th to July 6th. And so the July town hall was an opportunity for the team to share what we heard, what some of the key themes were emerging from that, and really get a sense from participants what we were missing, whether those themes resonated with people, and we've kept those channels open since then. So from there, the Equity and Inclusion team is looking to supplement what we heard from the town hall. While the town hall is a good opportunity to get many people together at once, I think we maxed out at around 300 people. We have over 3,000 employees here at Metro Transit, so we know we have a lot of work yet to do to make sure we're hearing from voices across the organization, which is even more complicated right now with the pandemic. So the team is out looking for ways to really engage different work units, particularly voices in areas we don't feel we've heard from yet, and we'll continue to incorporate that feedback into the recommended action steps that they're developing for senior leadership in September. In terms of the two examples you provided at the police, there's no intentional reason those weren't in there. I went really quickly through kind of a cross-section of examples, and I chose to focus on HAT instead of those other examples within the police. But as the chief presented at the Committee of the Whole last week, our police department does have several partnerships with community organizations, really partnering with people who have relationships in the community as a way to do their work. And I won't have many details about the tracking of data that you're referring to, but certainly we can provide more information about that as well in the future.
Chair, if I can.
Councilmember Flitzinger-Brittson.
Thank you. So I would say that in the work with the community ambassadors and other partners, in my mind, also really speaks to should be a part of a broader engagement plan for how do we engage young people in interactions and in addition to stops, but also how do we prep them to be great beneficiaries of a wonderful transit system. And so I think that those things should be integrated. It should not just be seen as a police effort, but should be something that's seen as a key way that we're engaging the future stakeholders of our organization. I'd also, and this might be a piece of reiterating what Councilmember Ferguson shared, but being measured, being explicit, and being transparent are required practices for advancing equity. You can't advance equity without those things. So just please be thoughtful about that when you're bringing things forward to us, that those are always included. Explicit, measured actions and outcomes, and anticipated outcomes. The last thing that I want to share is that I've continuously received feedback about the climate and culture, in particular since the town halls have started at Metro Transit. And so I want to take a step further from Councilmember Ferguson's questions beyond measure, but to accountability. So the feedback that I'm continuing to hear is that there's one that staff were hopeful that council members would be able to participate in the town halls so that we could see and hear firsthand. And I know council members attempted to be included and were discouraged from participating, and that wasn't communicated to the staff, that they were discouraged from participating, to try and provide, I'm using my fingers to make air quotes, a safer environment for employees to share. And that was something that a number of employees were discouraged by. I'd also say that the things that I'm hearing is a culture of senior leaders who openly do not value our equity efforts, either stepping away from equity meetings or being allowed to not engage or not accountable for the work because they don't care for it or they don't want to do it. So one of my questions is for Wes, if a senior leader indicates either in their behaviors or in their words that they aren't interested in equity work or in retaining diverse employees or creating an environment where women feel included or are included and valued, what is the action going to be taken with those senior leaders?
Madam Chair, I think what's being presented is hypothetical to me. I have said to my staff that this is a priority for our organization. I've said to them that retaliation will not be tolerated. I mean that. I expect every one of my staff to participate in this, and I find that they're interested in doing that, and there's a commitment to doing that. We have an organization, as Leslie mentioned, that has 3,000 employees. They're starting in different places. I'm not sensing a lack of commitment towards engaging in this work. I sense an environment where we're struggling with people starting in different places and having different thoughts on it. And that's always the case, as in my experience, when we talk about equity and we talk about how we can best advance equity. It doesn't mean that people in different places, that there's one place that's right and there's one place that's wrong. We're trying to make this a situation in our organization where everybody's participating and everybody can feel aligned with the movement towards advancing equity. So when you hear reports like this, unless I have specific examples, it's really hard for me to respond to them in specific ways. They become hypothetical. I don't say that to dismiss it, but I will say I don't want to understate the challenge in an organization as complex as Metro Transit to move an agenda that's a really important agenda to Metro Transit at the core of its very work in advancing equity, to move it forward in ways where there's not feelings of I'm more committed to this, they're less committed to this, I'm in this place, they need to be where I am. We're trying to create room for everybody to participate in this. And of course, there's some bottom lines in that. And if those bottom lines are crossed, I need to be aware of those specifics. And if I'm made aware of those specifics, then I need to address them specifically. But I can't do that unless I have that.
Okay with a hypothetical response. So if you have a senior leader who, when you're talking about equity, says they don't want to be involved in that conversation and they don't participate or they walk out of the meeting, that's a specific example. What is a way that you would handle that specific example? What would you, are there people who, to your point, who are definitely at different stages in their capacity to advance equity in a large public institution? Those people, I would argue, are not prepared to be senior leaders in this day and age. So my question would be, what would you do with the senior leader who is behaving in that way?
Council member, I'm going to ask that we have this conversation because I want to make sure that if there's anything that's involving specific personnel and things like that, that we're having that in the proper forum. So I don't want to, we'll make sure that we connect you and Wes offline so you can have the conversation. And we're also running late on time and we need to get through the budget. So I think we're going to move ahead. So I don't mean to stop the conversation, but we are running long on time already and we do need to finish the budget stuff tonight. So. All right, then I'll turn it over to Heather. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Next slide, please. Okay, so as a reminder, the MTS suite of services include contracted fixed routes. That's going to be the 30 or 40-foot buses that you see driving around the road. When they're on the road, you will not know the difference if it's a Metro Transit or an MTS bus. We have Metro Mobility. We've got the Metro Red Line, Transit Link, and Vanpool. Next slide, please. So the MTS budget is built from a base that includes meeting federal and state requirements, particularly in the area of Metro Mobility, and implementing past council actions, including negotiated labor contracts and service provider contracts. Our preliminary 21 operating budget is basically flat from 2020, and it's down nearly $6 million from pre-COVID forecasts. As we start going through MTS slides, you're going to notice that one of our highest cost areas is our service contracts, whereas when Ed went through the Metro Transit, you're going to see that they had higher staff costs, and it's just a service model difference there. I also want to let you know that every 5 years, there's a really higher number than normal of contracts that go up for bid. So about every 5 years, we have more uncertainty in our budget. In amongst all of the other uncertainty, 21 happens to be that year for us. So we're just going to keep a really close eye on that. Next slide, please. So this is our contracted services ridership. It tells a very similar story as what Metro Transit does. It was fairly steady with some good years, and then COVID hits and ridership takes a very steep. Just bars at the bottom, that is Metro Mobility, and you're going to see a very very slow and steady, but very steady climb with Metro Mobility. Our average growth pre-COVID was about 6% increase a year. That has dropped substantially in the 2020 amended budget and the 21 proposed. We do believe that Metro Mobility ridership will come back faster than other services, but it's certainly not going to be what it has been in past years. Next slide, please. So looking at MTS as a whole, total revenues and expenses come in at just under $135 million. On the revenue side, nearly 80% of our revenue comes from state general fund and motor vehicle sales tax. Those are represented by the categories and reserve categories on the pie chart. We'll also be using nearly $14 million of Federal CARES Act to replace motor vehicle sales tax and fare revenue. So when you're looking, Ed was talking about how much one-time money they were using in Metro Transit. It's a very similar story in MTS. So if you look at the Federal CARES Act, it's just shy of $14 million in reserves of almost $22 million. That's all one-time money. On the expense side, over 90% of our budget supports transit service, and the remaining funds support our MPO and administration type work. MPO stands for Metropolitan Planning Organization, and that's the federally mandated and federally funded transportation policy making. So if you hear about our planning side and MTS, I'm guessing most of you know the acronyms by now, but I just wanted to make sure I walked through that. I'll provide more detail on each program as we move forward. Next slide, please. So the largest component of our budget is Metro Mobility, and it faces a number of challenges. Pre-COVID, ridership growth had increased 30% since 2013, and this puts pressure on both the operating and capital sides of our budget, because as ridership growth roughly equals fleet growth. Last year, our program expanded into Lakeville, and now we are serving 94 communities. And we've also faced driver shortages that have resulted in wage increases, and that has put more pressure on our budget. Next slide, please. So Metro Mobility makes up about 70% of the total MTS budget. On the revenue side, the state general fund pays for 85% of Metro Mobility costs, and that's represented by the light green and then the orange pie slice. So if you remember when Ed had the chart before, really early in the presentation and talked about use of basically one-time state appropriations, that's what that 15.8 slice of reserve stands for. You'll also notice that we needed to budget $8.4 million of Federal CARES Act to make the budget whole, and fares make up the balance of our revenues. On the expense side, over 93% of our budget is spent on service. This includes the transit provider, fuel and materials, and contracted services pie pieces. So when you look at it, I mean, nearly all of the Metro Mobility budget is service. The remaining 7% of that, the budget funds staff, regional administration allocation costs that Ed talked about those earlier tonight. So I'm not going to talk about them in detail here other than to say that they're applied to our budgets as well. We also have some modest contracted services and other costs. The other operating costs are things like postage and rent and telephones and just kind of those basic functions that you need to have an office and a service function. Next slide, please. Our contracted regular route, transit link, and van pool make up just shy of a quarter of the MTS budget. So on the revenue side, MBES pays for 76% of program costs, and that's represented by the light green and orange pie slices. In this budget, the reserves represent one-time money, as does the $5.5 million of Federal CARES Act money. You will see a small slice of blue federal funds. Those are a different color of federal funds. They're 5310 money that comes through MnDOT for the transit link service. A good news story I can share is we found out within the last couple days that we're going to get about an additional $1.1 million of federal funds for transit link. And when we found out didn't work with when we had to land the preliminary budget. So that's going to be one of those changes that you will be seeing between now and the public comment draft of the budget. Fares make up the balance of our revenues. On the expense side, very similar to Metro Mobility, about 90% of our budget is spent on service, and that includes transit provider, contract, and fuel. Again, the remaining budget funds staff, regional administrative allocation, and some modest contracted services and other costs. Other costs in this service are the exact same that I just talked about in Metro Mobility. Planning makes up the remainder of our budget. On the revenue side, 62% of the budget is funded by federal sources, and motor vehicle sales tax provides the local match. So every year, a really good portion of our budget is the federal money that comes to us through MnDOT, and then Invest is the local match. On the expense side, most of our budget's in consulting, and this really primary represents the UPWP work plan, and that's what's federally funded. You're going to see and discuss the UPWP work plan and budget in more detail in September. So for now, this section is primarily a placeholder, and all those kind of program level decisions will be coming to you in September. Staffing is about a third of the budget. So we've got consulting is a large part of the budget, about 40% of the budget, salaries about a third, and then between RA allocations and other, that's about the other third. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess I was off a slide, excuse me. So this was the planning slide. Next slide, please. So one of the things that does roll through the MTS is the pass-through program for the suburban transit providers. That would be Plymouth, MBTA, Southwest Transit, and Maple Grove. Revenues are based on the state transit funding policy, and suburban transit providers are allocated more than directed in law. Pass-through amounts are determined by a formula, and the coming November motor vehicle sales will land the specific amount. Right now, it looks like we're right in the neighborhood of about $32 million for the pass-through program. Next slide, please. Okay, so as Ed talked and Leslie talked a little bit, when you look at the line items in our budget about what would be deemed significant from an equity perspective, some larger program areas emerge. And again, this is a chart that we rolled out with community development. I really welcome any feedback you have about if this answers your questions or if you'd like this presented differently moving forward. So just to generally orient you, the regional solicitations in the greens are those that are awarded or those that really go out. And the other three columns represent what I would call more in-house activities. This represents how we do things, including planning for changes and new initiatives that we would implement potentially in the regional solicitation column. So what I'll do is I'll just offer a flavor of our equity work in action. Full review would take longer than we have today, but we can certainly come back. So for those of you, some of you have seen this chart before when I presented it at community development. And like community development, we have some outward facing grant programs. The regional solicitation process is a similar process similar awarding process that MTS staff really help support. So the regional solicitation process allocates federal transportation funds to locally initiated projects to meet regional transportation needs. As the region's federally designated Metropolitan Planning Organization, the Council works with the Transportation Advisory Board, or TAB, to review and allocate the funds using an objective, data-driven process. One component of that scoring criteria are equity measures. The measures address the Council's role in advancing equity by examining how a project directly provides benefits to or impacts, positively or negatively, low-income populations, people of color, people with disabilities, youth, and the elderly. The criteria evaluates whether an applicant engaged these populations to identify the transportation needs and potential solutions, and how the project will address those needs. The criteria also evaluates a community's overall efforts to implement affordable housing goals and how the project improves multimodal access to affordable housing. The application was finalized, the most recent application was finalized after Council and the TAB engaged with over 900 people. So you've heard Leslie describe much of Metro Transit's kind of the upfront planning work related to service. As the other half of the transportation division, we really leverage their work. So equity reviews are also embedded in much of our regional policy work, including fare policy. Title VI review is required anytime fare adjustments go up and down. And within within Metro Mobility, the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, or TAC, advises the Council on management policies for public transportation services in the region from the perspective of riders with disabilities. So from that, let's maybe move to the annual work plan. So our annual work plan really drives our work, and this committee can influence that work through adoption of our annual work plan, and that typically happens late in Q4 or early in 2021. Division-wide, we can identify a number of initiatives, including we have an equity change team, staff leadership, and staff participate in professional development and personal growth, and in anything from equity-based trainings, webinars, discussions as encouraged, and that's supported through our training budget. Moving to contracts and consulting, this is the area of our budget where we're closely looking at opportunities to support the MCUB program. We've met with procurement and EEO staff and continue to look for opportunities to support MCUB businesses. As Nick mentioned in his July, I believe the July 27th director's report, we've also implemented a new minimum salary in our contracts, and we see that as a working wage and an equity initiative. Next slide, please. So when you look at the MTS consolidated budget, there are some significant swings in some specific line items, but expenses are down overall about 1%. Some of the swings are really just due to accounting, where for some of our accounting colleagues, we needed to have them reclassified into one category as another. So that's what you're seeing going on in fuels and materials and transit provider expenses. But overall, we're really flat right now, and most of that is due to anticipated ridership slowing in Metro Mobility. Next slide, please. So that really ends the MTS portion. So I guess I just welcome if you have any questions or there's additional information you want. I'll provide as much as I can now. Otherwise, I'm certainly happy to circle around with folks if there's something I can't address with you today.
All right, so are there any additional questions about the budget? We're going to be seeing these numbers again on Wednesday from the divisional at Met Council, or at their regular Metropolitan Council meeting. So it's a lot of budget talk in 1 week, but it's a good information to have. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
I do.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation today. I know we went through a lot of nuts and bolts with in regards to the budget. I did have a question of Heather. Heather, you said that there was $1 million that we didn't know that we were going to receive, and that's going to, be amended at a later at the next time. What was the source of that funds?
Madam Chair and council members, that was Federal CARES Act funds that is being routed to us through MnDOT. We thought there was likely funds coming, but we didn't know what that specific amount was until about less than a week ago.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Fredson, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentations tonight. I appreciate the challenge preparing for next year and anticipating what the budget for. My question would be, do we explore or consider budgeting for any kind of uptick in COVID for like the fall going into the winter, or even potentially budgeting with the expectation that potentially the COVID crisis would sort of fade over the course of next year gradually? Or if I understand it right, this budget just says, look, we're going to plan for this COVID crisis impacts on our budget through 2021 across the board.
Madam Chair, committee members, this is Ed Petrie, Metro Transit. I will say from a Metro Transit perspective, our budget in 2021 assumes the level of cleaning that we are doing today on our buses, trains, commuter rail. We are assuming that level of cleaning will become an expectation moving forward. So we have included that into our budget moving forward, and we anticipate that will be an ongoing expectation. One of the things that, as Wes had talked about, Leslie talked about, and I've also talked about, is the fact is that we have assumed an 80% service level for next year for our bus operations, but with our quarterly reviews of service, that's one thing that we're going to be continually watching, continually monitoring to see, are we on, are we off? Even between now and the end of the year, like Leslie mentioned, we're going to be going to that 80% service level in September. Maybe things will change between September and December that we'll have to come back to you in December and say it's moving from 80% to X%. We're also, the other thing to let you know, we're also watching, my staff, we're reporting ridership on a daily basis. We're watching ridership on a daily basis, and I'm reporting it to my senior staff on a weekly basis. We're watching ridership very, very closely. We're also watching motor vehicle sales tax very, very closely. We like I said, we get the updates in February and November, but we also get a monthly report from the state of Minnesota. We're actually looking at that, comparing that to our trends and our models and say, is this on or is this off? If it's a little better, whatever the case would be, then we quickly go back into our forecast and say, okay, that'll get us and buy us another month on the back end. So there's many different things. I don't know if I've answered your question, but there's many different switches and pulls that we're watching very closely, much more closely with this 2020 and 2021 budget that we've historically watched, because there is so much changing that we don't know today. I don't know if I've answered your question, Council Member.
You did generally, and I don't know if there's much else we can do. I guess my assumption is that there was a planning for any number of scenarios, but in the end, we just landed at a place where you have to assume that this is going to be with us for through next year at this level. I had one more comment, more than a question, Chair.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Yeah, thank you. Just on the subject of MVest, and I'm just very concerned about the impacts here on the economy moving forward, and as soon as the the monthly payouts to folks who are unemployed stop, and we're potentially going into a situation where people's unemployment runs out next year, and the impact that this is just going to have on the economy at large for potentially years out. And I would be really interested to hear what other metro regions and what other states across the country are doing to help fund transportation outside of revenue sources that are so dependent on the economies and gas tax.
Mm-hmm. Councilmember Fredson, I think we have some of that information. I know there's been a lot of looking at what other agencies are doing, and we can kind of see if there's something that can get put together so we can get an idea. I don't know, Ed or Heather, did you have a comment?
And I know we don't have the authorization
to
tap those funding sources, but I think it could really help inform the conversation that we have in the coming months and years.
Correct.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. And I just have a comment to follow up really on what Councilmember Fredson said, that this particular budget, every budget has changed for the years that I've been on council, between the time we get it now to when the final budget, it will be even more so this year, just because we're kind of working with a moving target. And so, be free to ask lots of questions about the numbers and how things may shift in different directions based of what we learn, because I would expect we'll probably learn a lot after the service changes in September that will inform things on the road, as well as we might have a better idea of some of our funding sources. All right, I'm going to ask one more time if there's any additional questions. All right. If not, thank you, Heather and Ed. I appreciate it. And you guys did a great job. And with that, hearing no objections, we will be adjourned. Thank you all.